put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The algorithm that killed. In September 2015, a small team of researchers at West Virginia University made a discovery that would bring one of the world's most powerful corporations to its knees. They weren't looking for a scandal. They were simply testing diesel emissions on American roads, expecting to prove how clean modern diesels had become. Instead, they found something impossible. The numbers didn't just seem wrong. They were physically, scientifically impossible. Volkswagen's clean diesel cars were pumping out 40 times the legal limit of toxic nitrogen oxide. But only on the road. In the lab, they were pristine. Someone had taught these machines to lie. And behind that lie was a conspiracy that reached into the marble halls of corporate power, involved thousands of engineers, and poisoned the lungs of millions. This is the story of Dieselgate, the dark business scandal that proved clean hands could hide the filthiest secrets. To understand how Volkswagen built a fraud worth billions, you have to go back to a boardroom decision made in the shadows of the 2008 financial crisis. While the world's economy burned, Volkswagen's leadership gathered to discuss an ambitious goal: overtake Toyota to become the world's largest automaker. But there was a problem. A massive, expensive problem called the American market. Americans loved big cars, powerful engines, and cheap gasoline. They didn't care about Volkswagen's efficient but underpowered vehicles. If VW wanted to dominate globally, they needed to crack America. And their weapon of choice was diesel. In Europe, diesel was king. Nearly half of all passenger vehicles ran on diesel fuel, celebrated for superior fuel economy and lower carbon emissions. But in America, diesel had an image problem. Americans associated it with loud, smoke-belching trucks and sluggish performance. Worse, American emission standards were significantly stricter than Europe's, particularly for nitrogen oxides, the invisible poison that causes respiratory disease, heart problems, and premature death. European regulators had been lenient on nitrogen oxide, prioritizing carbon reduction instead. America demanded both low carbon and low nitrogen oxide. It seemed impossible. The chemistry of diesel combustion created a cruel trade-off. Optimize for fuel efficiency and carbon, and nitrogen oxide soared. Reduce nitrogen oxide, and fuel economy collapsed. Other manufacturers knew this truth and responded honestly. Toyota focused on hybrids instead of diesel. BMW and Mercedes used expensive urea injection systems, technology that added cost and complexity to meet American standards. But Volkswagen's engineers were given a different mandate from their executives. Find a way to meet American emission standards without the expensive urea systems their competitors used. Do it cheaply. Do it quickly. And do it in time to capture the American market. What happened next wasn't innovation. It was deception on an industrial scale. Somewhere in Volkswagen's engineering departments, a line was crossed. Engineers developed software, code that could think, decide, and deceive. This defeat device was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its purpose. The software monitored the car's operating conditions, steering angle, speed patterns, engine operation, even whether the driver's door was open. When it detected the specific conditions of an emissions test, stationary, front wheels moving, rear wheels still, minimal steering input, the car would enter a special mode. In this mode, the engine ran clean, meeting every standard, passing every test with flying colors. But the moment the test ended and the car hit real roads, the software switched modes. The engine optimized for performance and fuel economy, spewing nitrogen oxide at levels up to 40 times the legal limit. The cars were literally programmed to lie to regulators, while poisoning the air their drivers breathed. Armed with this invisible fraud, Volkswagen launched one of the most successful marketing campaigns in automotive history. Clean diesel became their battle cry. Television commercials showed families breathing fresh air, children playing in green fields, all thanks to Volkswagen's revolutionary technology. They positioned themselves as the environmental hero, the company that proved you didn't have to sacrifice performance for the planet. They mocked the Prius and its drivers as sanctimonious and slow. Volkswagen diesel was powerful, efficient, and clean. It was the thinking person's environmental choice. Millions of Americans believed them. Environmentalists championed VW diesels. Celebrities drove them. Awards piled up. Green Car of the Year, World Car of the Year, endless praise from automotive journalists. From 2008 to 2015, Volkswagen sold over 500,000 diesel vehicles in America alone, and 11 million worldwide. Each one a ticking time bomb of toxic emissions, each one generating profit from poison, each one proof that the fraud was working. But empires built on lies always contain the seeds of their own destruction. The cracks began to show in the most unexpected place. A tiny research project at West Virginia University. In 2013, a non-profit organization called the International Council on Clean Transportation wanted to prove how clean modern diesels had become. They hired WVU Center for Alternative Fuels to test 3 diesel vehicles on real American roads, a BMW X5 and 2 Volkswagens, a Jetta and a Passat. The researchers expected to write a glowing report about diesel technology. Instead, they found a nightmare. The BMW passed cleanly, its expensive urea system working as designed, but the Volkswagens were catastrophically dirty. On real roads, under real driving conditions, the Jetta emitted 15 to 35 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxide. The Passat was even worse, up to 40 times over the limit. The researchers checked and rechecked their equipment. They ran the tests again. The results were consistent and damning. But here's what made the data truly chilling. When they brought the same cars back to the lab and ran official EPA test cycles, the cars were spotless. They passed with ease. It was as if the cars knew when they were being tested and when they could pollute freely, because that's exactly what they were doing. The researchers published their findings in May 2014, expecting Volkswagen to acknowledge a technical problem and issue a recall. Instead, they encountered a wall of corporate denial. Volkswagen's response was swift and dismissive. The differences must be due to driving style, temperature variations, technical factors beyond their control. They issued a voluntary recall, claiming they could fix the problem with a simple software update. But the California Air Resources Board wasn't satisfied. They tested the fixed vehicles and found them still grossly over the limit. Volkswagen stonewalled, delayed, offered technical excuses, anything to avoid the truth. For over a year, regulators pressed, and Volkswagen deflected. But by September 2015, the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The EPA issued a violation notice. Volkswagen had installed sophisticated software, designed specifically to cheat emission tests. The defeat device was real, the fraud was systematic, and the consequences would be apocalyptic. The public revelation triggered one of the fastest corporate collapses in modern business history. Within days, Volkswagen's stock price plummeted by 30%, erasing $25 billion in market value in a matter of hours. CEO Martin Winterkorn, who had led the company's aggressive growth strategy, initially claimed ignorance. He expressed shock and promised a full investigation. But the lies were too deep, the conspiracy too vast. Within a week, Winterkorn resigned, though he maintained he had no personal knowledge of the fraud. That claim would later be proven false. Sales halted. Production stopped. Dealerships across America were left with thousands of vehicles they couldn't sell. cars now exposed as environmental criminals rather than green heroes. The marketing triumph had become a toxic liability overnight. But the real horror emerged as investigators began peeling back the layers of corporate conspiracy. This wasn't the work of a few rogue engineers, as Volkswagen initially claimed. The defeat device had been in development since the 1990s, refined and deployed across multiple vehicle models and engine generations. Internal documents revealed that engineers had raised concerns about meeting emission standards as early as 2006. They told management that legitimate compliance would be expensive. Too expensive for the profit margins executives demanded. So the decision was made. Cheat. The fraud required coordination across departments: engineering, testing, compliance, and management. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of employees knew. Some participated willingly, others followed orders. Many stayed silent out of fear or loyalty. This was corporate culture corrupted from the top down. Documents later revealed in court showed the depth of management's knowledge. In 2014, while regulators were investigating the emissions discrepancies, VW executives discussed the defeat device in internal meetings. They debated whether to come clean or continue the cover-up. They chose lies. Even as the EPA tightened its investigation, Volkswagen's technical liaison to American regulators, a man named Oliver Schmidt, continued to provide false explanations and misleading data. He would later be arrested at Miami International Airport, sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy to defraud the United States. He was just one domino in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate leadership. While lawyers and executives fought in courtrooms, researchers began calculating something far more sinister: the human cost of Volkswagen's fraud. Nitrogen oxide isn't just an environmental concern, it's a killer. It aggravates asthma, causes respiratory infections, contributes to heart disease, and leads to premature death. One study estimated that the excess emissions from VW's diesel vehicles would cause approximately 60 premature deaths in the United States alone. Globally, the number was estimated at around 1,200 deaths. These weren't abstract statistics. They were real people with families, lives cut short by pollution that was deliberately, systematically unleashed. Volkswagen hadn't just defrauded customers and regulators. They had poisoned the air, knowing the consequences, calculating that profit was worth more than human lives. Every diesel car they sold generated revenue. Every mile driven generated poison. Every breath taken near a VW diesel on a highway carried a dose of preventable toxicity. And Volkswagen's executives knew this while smiling in television commercials about clean air and green futures. The financial reckoning came swiftly and brutally. In 2016, Volkswagen agreed to a settlement with the U.S. government: $14.7 billion for buybacks, repairs, and environmental remediation, the largest automotive settlement in American history. They agreed to buy back or fix nearly 500,000 vehicles. They established a fund for environmental projects to offset the excess pollution they had released. But that was just America. Globally, Volkswagen faced billions more in fines, settlements, and legal costs. By 2023, the total cost had exceeded $35 billion, making Dieselgate the most expensive corporate scandal in automotive history. The company that had dreamed of becoming the world's largest automaker had instead achieved infamy as one of the world's most brazen fraudsters. Criminal prosecutions followed the financial penalties. Oliver Schmidt's arrest was just the beginning. 8 Volkswagen executives were criminally indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice. Most remained safely in Germany, beyond the reach of American extradition. But the walls were closing in at home as well. Martin Winterkorn, the former CEO who claimed ignorance, was indicted in Germany on charges of fraud. Evidence emerged that he had been briefed on the defeat device as early as 2014, if not earlier. He knew. He authorized the continued cover-up. He lied to regulators, investors, and customers, while the fraud continued generating billions in revenue. His trial, repeatedly delayed by health issues and legal maneuvering, became a symbol of executive impunity. Powerful men using every advantage to avoid accountability for corporate crimes they orchestrated. But perhaps the darkest revelation emerged from understanding why Volkswagen committed this fraud in the first place. The company wasn't struggling. They weren't desperate. They were profitable, powerful, and perfectly capable of developing legitimate emission controls like their competitors. The defeat device wasn't born from necessity. It was born from greed and arrogance. Volkswagen's corporate culture, particularly under Winterkorn's leadership, was toxic and authoritarian. Executives demanded the impossible and punished failure. Engineers were pressured to deliver results without adequate resources. Dissent was crushed. When legitimate solutions proved too expensive or time-consuming, the culture encouraged shortcuts, deception, and rule-breaking. Volkswagen's leadership wanted to dominate the American market without paying the cost that dominance required. They wanted the profit margins of fraud with the reputation of environmental leadership. So they took both, and millions of people paid the price in toxic air. The scandal sent shockwaves through the entire automotive industry. Regulators worldwide launched investigations into other manufacturers. Similar, though less severe, emission manipulation was discovered at other companies. Fiat Chrysler, Mercedes-Benz, and others faced scrutiny and penalties. Dieselgate revealed that emission cheating wasn't a Volkswagen aberration. It was an industry temptation, and VW had simply been the most brazen. The scandal accelerated the death of diesel in passenger vehicles. Consumers lost trust. Cities began banning diesel vehicles from urban centers. Manufacturers pivoted hard toward electric vehicles, abandoning diesel development they had spent billions perfecting. Volkswagen itself, desperate to rehabilitate its image, launched an aggressive EV strategy, positioning itself as an electric pioneer. Though the irony wasn't lost on anyone, the company that had built an empire on a lie about clean diesel was now promising a clean electric future. Volkswagen survived, though transformed and humbled. The company paid its fines, settled its lawsuits, recalled its vehicles, and restructured its leadership. They admitted wrongdoing, eventually, though always minimizing executive knowledge and claiming institutional failures rather than criminal intent. By 2020, Volkswagen had returned to profitability, their EV strategy gaining traction, their past seemingly behind them. But the lessons of Dieselgate remain stark and chilling for anyone studying corporate power, ethical collapse, and the dark side of business. First, the scandal revealed how easily corporate culture can corrupt entire organizations. Volkswagen's fraud required thousands of employees to either participate, enable, or remain silent. Good people made terrible choices, not because they were evil, but because the institutional pressure to succeed overwhelmed their moral compass. When leadership prioritizes profit above all else and punishes failure instead of rewarding integrity, corruption becomes systematic rather than exceptional. Second, Dieselgate demonstrated that sophisticated technology can be weaponized to deceive at scale. The defeat device was brilliant engineering in service of criminal fraud. As systems become more complex and opaque, the potential for hidden manipulation grows exponentially. Software can lie more convincingly than humans, and detecting those lies requires vigilance that regulators often lack. Third, the scandal exposed the weakness of regulatory systems designed to trust rather than verify. For years, emission testing relied on predictable laboratory conditions that manufacturers could easily game. Real-world testing, the kind that finally caught Volkswagen, was rare and underfunded. Regulators assumed manufacturers would act in good faith, an assumption VW exploited ruthlessly. Only when independent researchers stumbled upon the discrepancy did the fraud unravel. Fourth, Dieselgate proved that even massive corporate fraud rarely leads to meaningful criminal accountability for top executives. Volkswagen paid billions in fines, money extracted from shareholders and customers, rather than the decision-makers who orchestrated the fraud. A handful of mid-level executives faced prosecution, but the architects of the conspiracy, protected by wealth, position, and friendly jurisdictions, largely escaped justice. For all the financial penalties, the scandal reinforced a bitter truth. Elite executives can commit fraud affecting millions, poison the air, cause preventable deaths, and retire comfortably if they're careful about jurisdiction and legal protection. Finally, the scandal illuminated the human cost hidden behind corporate balance sheets. 1,200 estimated premature deaths isn't an abstraction. It's 1,200 families destroyed, lives ended, suffering caused by decisions made in boardrooms by people who never breathed the poison they unleashed. Volkswagen's executives didn't see victims when they approved the defeat device. They saw profit margins, market share, competitive advantage. The distance between corporate decision and human consequence allowed them to proceed without confronting the moral weight of their choices. That distance, between power and impact, between decision and suffering, is the dark heart of modern corporate capitalism. Today, if you search Volkswagen's history, you'll find carefully curated narratives about transformation, sustainability, and electric futures. The company wants Dieselgate remembered as a past mistake, a scandal overcome, a lesson learned. But for the families who lost loved ones to preventable respiratory disease, for the communities that breathed poison disguised as progress, for the employees who were pressured to compromise their integrity, and for anyone who wants to understand how corporate power operates when unchecked, Dieselgate remains a present warning, not a past failure. The defeat device is gone, removed from every affected vehicle, disabled in software, eradicated from Volkswagen's engineering. But the culture that created it, the pressure for impossible results, the prioritization of profit over ethics, the willingness to sacrifice human health for competitive advantage, that culture persists throughout corporate America and beyond. Different companies, different industries, different technologies, but the same fundamental temptation. When truth is expensive and lies are profitable, when regulators are weak and penalties are tax-deductible, when executives are insulated from consequences and success is measured only in quarterly results, the seeds of the next scandal are already planted. In 2015, those researchers from West Virginia University didn't just discover excess emissions in 2 diesel vehicles. They uncovered proof that one of the world's most respected corporations had built an empire on systematic fraud, that millions of vehicles were deployed weapons of slow-motion poisoning, and that the people we trust to regulate and lead had failed catastrophically. They proved that clean hands can hide filthy secrets, that green marketing can disguise toxic reality, and that sometimes the most environmentally responsible choice is to not trust anyone claiming easy answers to hard problems. Because when something seems too good to be true, powerful, efficient, clean, and cheap all at once, it usually is, and somewhere, hidden in the code, buried in the culture, obscured by marketing and protected by power, is a lie waiting to be discovered. The only question is how long until someone starts testing on real roads instead of perfect laboratories, and how many people will breathe the poison before the truth finally comes to light. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.